Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller is in his 37th year at UCLA as UCLA's Hillel director. He previously served as Hillel director at Ohio State and as a rabbi of Congregation Ahavat Achim, New Bedford, Massachusetts. He was ordained in 1971 at Yeshiva University, where he also earned a master's degree in rabbinic literature. He has taught Kabbalah and Talmud at the University of Judaism.
You don't have to tell me.
Huh?
It's okay.
You don't want to? He's a fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute.
All the juicy details. We want all the details.
For Advanced Jewish Studies in Jerusalem, and he's a member of the Academic Advisory Board of the Wilstein Institute for Social Policy. He's a member of the Wexner Heritage Foundation and a layman faculty fellow at the Brandeis Bardeen Institute. He loves the constant challenges presented by students who consistently and persistently ask the most interesting questions. So please let Rabbi Chaim talk, and then I'll introduce the other students.
I suspect I stole your chair.
So I understand that we have about 10 minutes to make it over. The only part that was true in all of that was that I like to engage in business.
You are really.
And I'm an old. No, I mean, it's true, but I mean, this is the essence. So there's a dimension to this conversation that is maybe to be taken for granted. In other words, I don't understand what the question is. The basis for the existence of Israel is partition. There's no other basis for the existence of Israel. It's the only legal justification for there being a Jewish state. And that's number one. Number two, it did take a while for the Arab world, and for the Palestinians in particular, to wake up to the fact that partition is also the one thing that would guarantee their own independence. So only since the introduction of a peace process was there an affirmation or a possible affirmation on the part of Palestinians of two states. But as a Jew looking at the state of Israel and thinking about Israel's survival, I come back to what I said when I started. I don't understand the question. The only guarantee for Israel's survival is a two-state solution. So who could oppose that? In other words, you could imagine that maybe at some point in the far distant history, one state will emerge. But at least in terms of what needs to be dealt with presently, the only livable solution would be two states. Now, that doesn't mean that the two sides are ready for two states presently. In fact, we seem to have, we're really masters of this. We've gone backward instead of forward. History doesn't work in progressive line. I think you know this if you study history. And sometimes it's possible that in the 90s, people were more willing and more able, some people, to look forward than others. Certainly within the Jewish community and among the Israelis, there was a great belief in the possible solution in the two-state solution. I would say that belief has diminished. People are more skeptical. There's been a second round of terrorism that's hardened people's opinions. What is also true is that the settlements have dug in, and there's even, I would say, the whole settlement enterprise is much more, much stronger, and not just in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the minds of people. It's become a reality, so much so, that there are people who even venture to say that maybe we should just give the Arabs a vote and have a one-state solution. There are Jews who are saying this, meaning there are Jews who are willing to commit suicide. They claim to love Israel, but they're willing to destroy the state of Israel because they're so the notion that the status quo is the only way to go has been embedded in our minds, and the fact that there's the belief that there's no one on the other side to talk to. So just let it flow. Let's go with the flow. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. I don't want to over-dramatize that position. I think it's a very dangerous. There's a dangerous move within the Jewish community that reflects a sense of cynicism and a lack of ability to believe in a better future. Now, why is there this cynicism? I don't think it's without reason. I think that many Jews don't believe that Arabs really accept the fact that the Jews have come home. And I interact with Palestinians all the time. And I can tell you that that's most probably the sense, that within the average Palestinian family, there is still a sense that the Jews are interlopers. So you can imagine that after 60 years of living there, of continuous living of Jews for a couple thousand years, one would hope that the other side recognizes the reality of your presence and the legitimacy of your presence. On the other hand, there is an Arab peace proposal on the table that everybody's forgotten. Anybody know about the Arab peace proposal? Who proposed it? Anyone who yes? Saudi Arabia, right? And the Arab peace proposal does indicate that the Arab nations recognize that Israel's there for peace. So, in other words, I want to say that it's not so simple. On the one hand, the people don't seem to understand that the Jews have a connection to the Middle East. It's hard for a Jew, it's hard for me to interact with people who deny that I have a history that's connected to this place and claim that Jerusalem, all this, what I consider to be nonsense. But nonsense has been able to seep into people's minds. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, there have been some serious political moves that we shouldn't forget about. So what I'd like to say is that we need to have a vision of a possibility of a solution. At the same time, meaning a two-state solution. At the same time, that we interact with a vigilance regarding the needs of what a negotiation entails. And that means security for both Israel and the Palestinians. It means viable economy. And it means that we need leaders who are able to do the hard work of resolving the day-to-day issues that are required in creating a state. Now, two states. Now, some of you may know that there's a proposal on the table by Gilad Shur and Arieh and a third party. And the basis of that proposal is not so remote, it's not so, I would say, far away from what I'm talking about. Talking from the Israeli side, from the Jewish side. Arieh and Gilad Shur are talking about the fact that we need to engage the people living in the territories in a realistic conversation about what it would mean to relocate into Israel with different boundaries, meaning boundaries more or less of 1967 with adjustments. Okay? It doesn't mean we have to do it, but we need to begin that conversation. We need to plan structurally what it would mean to resettle thousands of people, financially and in terms of communities, where they would live. Families have to be completely relocated, and the government has to take responsibility for it. These conversations, the government is not involved in these conversations, but there are private people who have begun these conversations. I think it's important because it gives people a sense of what can be accomplished, that it is not impossible. And if we believe that it is impossible, it seems to me there'll never be that move. So let me end. I'm sure we'll have a chance for more conversation in the future. What keeps me going, and I vacillate between periods of real energetic activism on behalf of Hamas and frustration and pessimism about the possibility of solution. What keeps me going is a vision, and it's a story that I always tell that I initially heard from Abraham Joshua Heschel. So Heschel was in a book that he wrote about prayer, tells the story of a town, a remote town, where all the clocks broke down, gradually. So none of the clocks in the town were active. But people were, due to habit, kept on winding their clocks until they became disillusioned, with watches and clocks that told the wrong time. But only one person in the town was stubborn enough to keep on winding his clock. So when the watchmaker came 2 years later, the only clock that he could fix, that he could repair, was the watch of the person who was stubborn enough to keep on winding his clock. So that's my song that I sing. We have to keep on winding the clock. It's broken. There's no process. But if we don't wind the clock, when the opportunity comes to resolve the conflict, we won't even recognize the opportunity, and we won't even know how to begin. So this seems to me our obligation, to keep it going, to hope, and to give people a sense of possibility. The world has lost the sense of what a possibility could be. And we've moved only in extreme polar directions.